The glass towers of downtown Seattle reflected the gray October sky as I stood outside Apex Solutions headquarters, adjusting my tie for the third time. My hands were steady, but my heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. This was it. The interview that could change everything. I pushed through the revolving doors into a lobby that screamed money, marble floors, a waterfall wall, and furniture that probably cost more than my entire year's rent in the studio apartment I shared with 2 roommates in Renton. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, barely glanced up from her computer. "Name?" she asked, her tone suggesting I was interrupting something important. "Daniel Foster. I have a 10 a.m. interview for the senior software architect position." She typed something, her manicured nails clicking against the keyboard. 14th floor. "Someone will meet you there." The elevator ride felt like ascending into another world. With each floor, I left behind the version of myself who'd spent the last 5 years clawing my way through community college night classes while working double shifts. The version who still had grease under his fingernails from fixing the diner's ancient POS system at 2 a.m. because we couldn't afford to call a real tech. The 14th floor opened into a reception area where everything was white and chrome. A woman in her mid-30s, wearing a blazer that probably cost my monthly salary, stood waiting. Her name tag read, Patricia Wells, HR Director. "Daniel Foster?" She extended her hand with the kind of grip that was just firm enough to be professional but not warm. "Follow me, please. The panel is ready for you." My stomach tightened. Panel. Of course it was a panel. The conference room was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Seattle skyline, and seated at the long table were 4 people who looked like they'd never worried about making rent in their lives. Patricia gestured to the single chair facing them, the hot seat. "Daniel, meet your interview panel," Patricia began, moving to join them on the other side. "This is Leonard Hartwick, our CTO. Vanessa Price, VP of Engineering. Mitchell Grant, Lead Systems Architect. And I believe you've already met me." I shook hands with each of them, noting the way Leonard's eyes swept over my off-the-rack suit, the slight smirk on Mitchell's face, Vanessa's complete lack of expression. These were people who'd gone to Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon. I could see them calculating my worth before I'd even sat down. "So, Daniel," Leonard began, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Walk us through your background. Your resume is unconventional." Unconventional. That was one word for it. I graduated from Seattle Community College last year with a degree in computer science. I started keeping my voice even. Before that, I worked various jobs while taking classes part-time. It took me 5 years to complete a 2-year degree, but I was working full-time to support myself. "And what kind of work were you doing?" Vanessa asked, her pen poised over her notepad like she was preparing to write something disappointing. This was the moment I'd been dreading. The moment where their expressions would change, where I'd go from potential candidate to charity case in their eyes. "I worked at Jimmy's Diner on Aurora Avenue. Started as a dishwasher, worked my way up to assistant manager." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Mitchell laughed, not a chuckle but a full laugh that he didn't bother to hide behind his hand. "A diner," he repeated like I'd said I'd worked as a rodeo clown. "And you think that qualifies you for a senior architect position at Apex Solutions?" "Mitchell," Patricia said, but there was no real reproach in her voice. "No, I'm serious," Mitchell continued, and I could see Vanessa fighting a smile. "We're talking about enterprise-level systems serving Fortune 500 companies. This isn't about flipping burgers or, fixing a cash register when it jams." The condescension in his voice made my jaw clench, but I'd practiced for this. I'd known it would be hard. What I hadn't expected was how much it would hurt, sitting in this room with these people who'd never had to choose between textbooks and groceries, who'd never felt the shame of showing up to class smelling like fryer oil because you'd worked a double and didn't have time to shower. "Actually," I said carefully, "I was responsible for all the technology systems at Jimmy's. The point-of-sale system, inventory management, employee scheduling, customer relationship management. When I started, they were using pen and paper for everything except the register, which was from 1987. "How charming," Vanessa murmured, and I saw her exchange a look with Leonard. "Let me ask you something, Daniel," Leonard said, his tone taking on the patient quality of someone explaining something to a child. "Do you understand the scope of what we do here? We build systems for companies like Boeing, Amazon, Microsoft. We're talking about handling millions of transactions per second, ensuring 99.999% uptime, managing security protocols that protect billions of dollars in assets. He paused, letting that sink in. And you're telling us that your experience managing, maybe 50 transactions a day at a diner, qualifies you for this position? My throat felt tight. Part of me wanted to stand up and leave, to preserve whatever dignity I had left. But I'd come too far. I'd worked too hard. And I had something they didn't know about yet. I understand your concern, I said. But I think you're underestimating what I accomplished at Jimmy's. Really? Mitchell said, not even trying to hide his skepticism now. Enlighten us. I reached into my portfolio bag and pulled out my laptop. Do you mind if I show you something? Leonard waved his hand dismissively. By all means. I opened my laptop and pulled up a presentation I'd prepared, connecting to the conference room's display system. The first slide showed a simple logo, a diner building with code brackets around it. When I started at Jimmy's, the diner was losing money every month, I began. The owner, Jimmy Thompson, was about to close down. He'd been in business for 30 years, but he couldn't compete with the chains. So I proposed a solution. I clicked to the next slide, showing a diagram of an integrated system. I built a complete custom software suite from scratch. Point-of-sale integration with real-time inventory tracking, predictive ordering based on historical data and weather patterns, dynamic pricing optimization, customer loyalty program with personalized marketing, employee scheduling algorithm that reduced labor costs by 23%, and a reservation system that integrated with Google Maps and Yelp. The room had gone quiet, but not the dismissive quiet from before. This was different. Vanessa had stopped taking notes and was actually looking at the screen. The system I built increased Jimmy's revenue by 47% in the first year, I continued. It reduced food waste by 31%, decreased labor costs without cutting hours, and improved customer satisfaction scores by 60%. Within 18 months, Jimmy went from nearly bankrupt to opening a second location. That's impressive, Patricia said, and she actually sounded like she meant it. Did you have help building this? No. I did it all myself between shifts and classes. Took me about a year to get the full system running. Mitchell leaned forward. What did you build it on? What stack? Python backend with Django framework, PostgreSQL database, React frontend, deployed on AWS with Docker containers, automated CI/CD pipeline using Jenkins, and full test coverage with unit and integration tests. I could see the gears turning in their heads now. These weren't just buzzwords, this was the same tech stack Apex Solutions used. The system is still running, I added. Both locations use it. And Jimmy's been approached by 3 other independent restaurants asking if they could license it. Leonard's expression had changed from condescending to interested. Maybe even impressed. Why didn't you lead with this? He asked. Because it wasn't on your job application, I said simply. You asked for education and employment history. You didn't ask what I'd built. Fair point, Vanessa said, and now she was really studying me. Can we see the actual system? Not just slides. Of course. I pulled up a demo environment I'd prepared, walking them through the interface. I showed them the inventory prediction algorithm, the customer analytics dashboard, the scheduling optimization tool. With each screen, I watched their skepticism fade. Mitchell, who'd laughed at me 15 minutes ago, was now leaning so far forward he was almost out of his chair. This predictive ordering algorithm, how accurate is it? Currently running at 94% accuracy, I said. It factors in day of week, local events, weather forecasts, historical trends, and even social media sentiment about the neighborhood. Jesus, he muttered. The code is clean too, I added, pulling up a GitHub repository. Fully documented, follows PEP 8 style guide, modular architecture, scalable design. I built it knowing that if it worked, I might want to expand it or license it to others. Leonard stood up and walked around the table to get a closer look at my laptop screen. This is production code? Running right now. Jimmy's lunch rush starts in about an hour. You can watch the orders come through in real time if you want. He scrolled through my code, his expression unreadable. The room was silent except for the clicking of my laptop's trackpad. Finally, Leonard looked up at me. Daniel, I'm going to be honest with you. When you walked in here, I thought this interview was going to be a waste of everyone's time. Your resume didn't scream senior architect to me. I braced myself for the rejection. But this, he gestured at my laptop, this is exactly the kind of thinking we need here. You identified a complex business problem, designed a solution from scratch, implemented it solo, and delivered measurable results. That's what we do at Apex, just on a larger scale. Was this really happening? I do have one question though, Vanessa said. Why Apex? If you built all this, why not start your own company? License this software? You could make a lot of money? I thought about this answer carefully because it was the truth, and the truth was complicated. Because I've spent the last 5 years building something small, I said. And I learned everything I could from that. But now I want to learn how to build something big. I want to work on systems that serve millions of users, that have to handle real scale, real complexity. I can't learn that at Jimmy's Diner. I paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. And honestly, I want to prove that someone like me, someone who didn't go to Stanford, who learned to code by fixing a broken cash register and Googling error messages at 3 a.m., can be just as good as anyone else in this room. Maybe better. Mitchell let out a low whistle. I owe you an apology. When I laughed earlier, you judged me based on where I came from instead of what I could do. I finished. I get it. I'm used to it. But that's exactly why I'm going to be an asset to this company. I know what it's like to be underestimated. Leonard extended his hand across the table. Daniel, I think we'd be idiots not to hire you. Welcome to Apex Solutions. I shook his hand, my mind reeling. Had that really just happened? Wait, I said. That's it? I'm hired. Unless you don't want the job, Vanessa said with a smile, a real one this time. No, I want it. I thought there'd be more interviews, technical assessments, that kind of thing. Oh, there will be, Leonard said. HR will set all that up. But between you and me, that's just procedure. Anyone who can build what you built, with the constraints you had, is exactly who we need here. As I gathered my things to leave, Mitchell stopped me at the door. Hey Daniel? I really am sorry about the burger flipping comment. That was out of line. It's okay, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. Just remember this next time you're interviewing someone whose resume doesn't look like everyone else's. I will. Promise. I rode the elevator back down in a daze, but I wasn't thinking about the job offer or the salary we hadn't even discussed yet. I was thinking about the look on Leonard's face when he saw my code. The way Vanessa had started asking technical questions like I was an equal. The apology from Mitchell. I'd spent 5 years being invisible. Being the guy in the diner uniform, serving people who looked through me like I wasn't there. Being the student in the back of the classroom who smelled like French fries. Being told, implicitly and explicitly, that I didn't belong in rooms like the one I'd just left. But I'd proven them wrong. As I pushed through the revolving doors back out into the Seattle drizzle, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who'd believed in me from the start. Jimmy's Diner, this is Jimmy speaking. Hey boss. It's Danny. Danny. How'd the interview go? They realize what they'd be getting? I smiled, letting the rain hit my face. Yeah, Jimmy. I think they finally did. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of the same building, but everything felt different. I wasn't a hopeful candidate anymore. I was an employee. The security guard in the lobby smiled and handed me a badge with my name and photo. Daniel Foster, Senior Software Architect. Seeing it in print made it real in a way the offer letter hadn't. The badge unlocked the elevator to the 14th floor, but instead of the conference room, I was directed to an open office space where at least 50 people sat at pristine white desks with multiple monitors, mechanical keyboards, and enough tech to make my college computer lab look like a museum. Daniel? Leonard appeared from behind a glass partition. Welcome. Let me show you to your workspace. He led me through rows of developers, most of whom didn't look up from their screens. The space was eerily quiet despite being full of people. Everyone wore headphones, isolated in their own coding worlds. This is your desk, Leonard said, gesturing to a setup that made my eyes widen. 3 4K monitors, a top-of-the-line laptop in a docking station, an ergonomic chair that probably cost more than my first car. I took the liberty of having IT set up everything you listed in your equipment preferences. If you need anything else, just let them know. This is incredible, I said, running my hand over the desk surface. Only the best for our team. Now, let me introduce you to your squad. He led me to a cluster of 4 desks arranged in a pod formation. 3 were occupied by developers who looked up as we approached. Team, this is Daniel Foster, our new senior architect. Daniel, meet your squad. This is Neil Bradshaw, Grace Winters, and Colin O'Brien. Neil stood first, a guy in his early 30s with a neatly trimmed beard and a Stanford hoodie that looked like it had been welded to his body. Hey, welcome aboard. Stanford CS, class of 2015. You. The question hung in the air. I knew what he was really asking. Which prestigious school did you attend? Seattle Community College, I said evenly. Graduated last year. The pause was microscopic, but I caught it. Neil's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes. Cool, cool, he said, sitting back down. Community college. That's different. Grace, a woman with purple-streaked hair and thick-framed glasses, waved from her seat. MIT 2017. Don't worry about Neil. He asks everyone that question within 5 minutes of meeting them. It's like his security blanket. And I'm Colin, the third developer said with an Irish accent. Trinity College Dublin, but I've been in the States for 3 years now. Welcome to the madhouse. Leonard clapped me on the shoulder. You're in good hands. Neil's our lead on the Cascade project. That's what you'll be working on. He'll get you up to speed. I've got a meeting, but my door's always open. As Leonard walked away, I felt the shift in energy. We were no longer in front of the CTO. The performance was over. So, community college? Neil said, spinning in his chair to face me fully. That's a first for this team. Actually, I think that might be a first for the whole company. Probably, I said, setting my backpack down. But Leonard seemed to think I was qualified. Oh, I'm sure you are, Neil said quickly. Too quickly. I mean, Leonard knows what he's doing. It's just different. We usually hire from the top-tier programs. MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Berkeley. Schools with real CS research programs. Neil, Grace said, a warning in her voice. What? I'm just making an observation. No offense, Daniel, but there's a reason companies recruit from certain schools. The caliber of education, the network, the ability to pay $60,000 a year in tuition? I offered. The desk pod went quiet. Colin coughed awkwardly. That's not what I meant, Neil said, his ears reddening. I'm just saying there's a difference between theory and practice. Here at Apex, we work on problems that require deep understanding of algorithms, system design, distributed computing. That's stuff you learn in a rigorous academic environment. I felt the old familiar feeling rising in my chest, the need to prove myself, to defend my worth. But I pushed it down. I'd already proven myself to Leonard. I didn't owe Neil anything. I look forward to learning from all of you, I said simply. What's the Cascade project? Neil seemed thrown by my refusal to engage in whatever pissing contest he was setting up. Right. Cascade. It's our flagship product redesign. We're rebuilding the entire inventory management system for our biggest client, Northwest Logistics. They handle distribution for 40% of the retail stores in the Pacific Northwest. We're talking about tracking millions of items, thousands of warehouses, real-time updates across the entire supply chain. He pulled up a system architecture diagram on his center monitor. We've been working on it for 8 months. The old system was built 15 years ago and it's falling apart. Our job is to rebuild it from the ground up, modern stack, scalable architecture, the whole 9 yards. I studied the diagram. It was complex. Dozens of microservices, message queues, database clusters, caching layers. But as I looked at it, something nagged at me. What's your data consistency model? I asked. Eventually consistent, Neil said. Standard for distributed systems at this scale. And your conflict resolution strategy? Last write wins with timestamp ordering. I frowned. For inventory management? That seems risky. What happens when 2 warehouses try to allocate the same item simultaneously? The timestamps handle it, Neil said, but I noticed he glanced at Grace when he said it. Right, but in a last write win system you could lose one of those allocations, I pressed. That means you could oversell inventory, which for a retail logistics company would be a disaster. Have you considered using CRDTs or consensus protocols instead? Neil's jaw tightened. We've thought through all the edge cases. The system is designed to handle race conditions. I'm sure it is, I said, not wanting to start a fight on my first day. Just a thought. You know, Neil said, his voice taking on a sharp edge, one thing you'll learn working at this level is that textbook solutions don't always apply to real-world problems. We can't just throw a consensus protocol at everything and call it a day. There are performance implications, cost considerations, complexity trade-offs. Of course, I said. I just meant. And before you suggest it, yes, we know about Paxos and Raft. We did go to schools where we learned this stuff in depth, remember? We spent years studying distributed systems theory. So maybe let's see how you do with the actual implementation before we redesign the whole architecture based on, what was it? Your diner experience. The words hit like a slap. Grace looked mortified. Colin suddenly became very interested in his keyboard. Neil, Grace said sharply. That's enough. What? I'm just being honest. This is a professional environment. We can't coddle people. I took a breath, counting to 5 in my head like I used to do when customers yelled at me about their overcooked eggs. You're right, I said finally. I should learn the system before offering suggestions. Why don't you walk me through the current implementation? Neil studied me for a moment, seeming disappointed that I hadn't risen to the bait. Fine. Pull up the repo and I'll give you the tour. The rest of the morning was tense but professional. Neil walked me through the codebase, which was massive, over 200,000 lines of code spread across dozens of microservices. The architecture was sophisticated, no doubt about that. These were clearly talented developers. But as I dug deeper, I started seeing problems. The code was complex, maybe unnecessarily so. There were abstraction layers on top of abstraction layers, design patterns implemented because they were textbook solutions rather than because they solved actual problems. The test coverage was spotty at best. And that data consistency issue I'd flagged? The more I looked at it, the more convinced I became that it was a ticking time bomb. Lunch? Colin asked around noon, appearing at my desk with a friendly smile. Grace and I usually go to the food trucks on 4th Avenue. You should come. I brought lunch, I said, pulling out the Tupperware container from my backpack. Trying to save money, you know? First week is on me, Colin insisted. Come on, you need to meet some of the other developers. I glanced at Neil, who was deep in his monitors, pointedly not acknowledging us. Sure, I said. That sounds good. The three of us rode the elevator down, and as soon as the doors closed, Grace let out a long breath. I'm so sorry about Neil, she said. He's not usually that bad. Yes, he is, Colin contradicted. He's exactly that bad. He does this with every new person, but I think you got it worse because of the whole college thing. Neil's very invested in the prestige hierarchy. It's like his entire identity is wrapped up in going to Stanford, Grace added. He brings it up constantly. The hoodie, the class ring, the Stanford alumni meetings. It's exhausting. Does he know about? I hesitated. About my interview? About what I built at the diner? They exchanged looks. Leonard mentioned something about it in the team meeting, Grace said. But honestly, I think that made it worse for Neil. He doesn't like the idea that someone without the pedigree could be as good as him. Maybe better. We emerged into the Seattle afternoon, gray and drizzly as always. The food trucks were lined up along the street, offering everything from Korean barbecue to gourmet grilled cheese. So what did you build at this diner? Colin asked as we waited in line at a Thai food truck. Leonard was pretty vague, just said it was impressive. I gave them the short version. The integrated system, the results, the impact on Jimmy's business. Grace's eyes widened. You built all that by yourself? While working full-time and going to school? I had a lot of late nights, I said. That's incredible, she said. Honestly, that's more impressive than anything we did in school. Building something real that solves actual problems? That's the hardest part of this job, and you already know how to do it. Neil doesn't seem to think so, I said. Neil's scared, Colin said bluntly. He can see you're good and it threatens him. The whole Stanford thing is armor. Going to a fancy school is what makes you valuable, then nobody can take that away from you. But if value comes from what you can actually build, then he has to compete on merit, and that terrifies him. We ate our lunch sitting on a bench in a small plaza talking about everything except work. Where we grew up, what brought us to Seattle, our first coding experiences. It felt good to just be normal, to not have to prove anything. When we got back to the office, I found a post-it note on my monitor in handwriting I didn't recognize. Don't let Neil get to you. We need fresh perspectives here. Vanessa. The VP of engineering had been in her office when we left. She must have walked by my desk. That afternoon, Neil assigned me my first task. Implementing a new API endpoint for the warehouse transfer system. It was straightforward work, probably chosen because it was contained and low risk. A test to see if I could handle the basics. I dove into the code, familiarizing myself with the patterns and conventions the team used. As I worked, I noticed something interesting. The existing endpoints had a subtle bug in how they handled transaction rollbacks. It was rare enough that it probably hadn't shown up in testing, but in production with millions of transactions, it would definitely cause problems. I could fix it. It would take maybe an hour to implement a proper solution. But I hesitated, remembering Neil's reaction to my earlier suggestion. If I just went and fixed something without asking, would that make things worse? I glanced over at Neil's desk. He was in a meeting, visible through the glass walls of a conference room, gesticulating at a whiteboard. Grace caught me looking. You found something, didn't you? Maybe, I said. There's a bug in the transaction handling. Not in the code I'm working on, but related to it. What kind of bug? I showed her. Her eyes widened as she followed the logic. Oh shit, she said. That could cause data corruption under the right conditions. Should I fix it? She thought for a moment. Yes. Absolutely yes. Just document what you found and why you fixed it. Make it clear in your commit message and in the code review. If Neil has a problem with you fixing bugs, that's his problem, not yours. So I fixed it. Not just the immediate issue, but I refactored the whole transaction handling system to use a proper two-phase commit protocol. It took me the rest of the afternoon, but when I was done it was solid. I submitted my pull request at 5:47 p.m., just before most people started heading home. Neil was still in meetings, so I packed up my stuff and headed for the elevator. Daniel? I turned to see Mitchell, the lead systems architect who'd laughed at me during my interview, jogging to catch up. Got a minute? He asked. Sure, I said, stepping away from the elevator. I just saw your PR. The transaction handling fix. My stomach dropped. Was I about to get lectured on my first day? That was really good work, Mitchell said. That bug's been in the code for months. We've had intermittent data inconsistencies that we couldn't track down. I think you just found the root cause. Oh, I said, relief flooding through me. Thank you. I also saw Neil assigned you a junior-level ticket for your first task. That's bullshit, and I'm going to talk to him about it. You're a senior architect. You should be working on architecture, not grunt work. I don't mind, I said. I'm still learning the code base. And you learned it well enough in one day to spot and fix a bug the rest of us missed for months, Mitchell pointed out. Look, I know I was an ass during your interview. I judged you based on your background instead of your skills. But I meant what I said. I was wrong. And I'm not going to let Neil repeat my mistake. I appreciate that, I said. One more thing, Mitchell added. That comment you made about the data consistency model? During your first hour on the team? Yeah. You were right. It's been bothering me all day, so I ran some simulations. Under high load, with concurrent warehouse updates, we absolutely could oversell inventory. It's a design flaw, and we need to fix it before we go to production. He grinned. Turns out, sometimes the guy from the diner knows what he's talking about. Go figure. I rode the bus home that evening feeling a complicated mix of emotions. My first day had been harder than I'd expected. Neil's hostility, the constant awareness of being different, the pressure to prove myself over and over again. But I'd also made allies. Grace and Colin were genuine. Mitchell had apologized again and backed me up. Vanessa had left that note. And I'd already contributed something valuable to the project. As the bus wound through the Seattle streets toward my apartment in Renton, I thought about the two worlds I was straddling. In this morning, I'd been in that glass tower, surrounded by people with fancy degrees and expensive clothes. Tonight, I'd go home to my studio apartment, heat up leftovers, and video chat with Jimmy about how his lunch rush went. I belonged to both worlds now and to neither. But maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where I needed to be. My phone buzzed with a Slack message from Grace. First day survival celebration drinks Friday after work? You, me, Colin, and anyone else on the team who isn't an insufferable Stanford grad. I smiled and typed back, I'm in. 6 weeks into the job and I'd settled into an uncomfortable rhythm. Every morning I'd arrive at Apex to find Neil already at his desk, having come in early to establish dominance. Every day he'd find some subtle way to undermine me, assigning me tasks beneath my level, questioning my code in reviews with a patronizing tone, or forgetting to include me in important meetings. But I was surviving. More than surviving, actually. My code reviews had the highest approval rating on the team. I'd fixed 3 critical bugs that had been plaguing the system for months. Even Vanessa had sent me a personal email complimenting my work. Still, Neil made sure I knew I was an outsider. Morning, Danny, he said as I sat down at my desk on a Tuesday in early December. He'd started calling me Danny instead of Daniel, a small thing but deliberate. I need you to update the API documentation for the endpoints we deployed last week. Should only take you a few hours. Documentation. Again. It was important work, sure, but it wasn't architecture. It wasn't what I'd been hired to do. Actually, I said, swiveling my chair to face him. I've been looking at the Cascade project timeline, and I think we need to talk about the rollout strategy. Neil's expression tightened. The rollout strategy has already been decided. It's in the project plan. I know, but I think there's a problem with... Daniel, he interrupted, his voice taking on that condescending edge I'd learned to recognize. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the senior team has been planning this rollout for months. We've considered every angle. What we need from you right now is execution, not strategy. Let the people with experience handle the big picture. The people with experience. As if my experience didn't count. I felt Grace watching from her desk, but I kept my voice level. Okay. But can I at least show you what I found? It'll take 5 minutes. Neil sighed like I was a child refusing to eat his vegetables. Fine. 5 minutes. I pulled up my analysis on my screen, a detailed breakdown of the proposed rollout schedule and a simulation I'd run over the weekend showing what would happen when they migrated Northwest Logistics data to the new system. So the plan is to do the migration during their lowest traffic period, which is Sunday from 2 to 6 a.m., I began. The team estimated it would take 3 hours for the data migration and 1 hour for validation. Correct, Neil said impatiently. But when I ran the migration on a staging environment with production data volumes, it took 7 hours. Not 3. Neil frowned. That's impossible. We calculated the migration time based on the database size and transfer rates. You calculated it based on the current database size, I corrected. But Northwest Logistics has been accumulating data for 15 years. There are historical records, archived transactions, legacy tables that haven't been cleaned up. The actual data set is 3 times larger than what's in the active tables. I pulled up my simulation results. And that's not even the biggest problem. The new system uses a different schema structure. The migration script has to transform data on the fly, which adds overhead. Plus, there are foreign key constraints that have to be validated, indexes that have to be rebuilt, and... I get it, Neil said sharply. But we've tested this. We ran the migration in staging. Did you run it with a full production data dump? Or just a sample? His silence was answer enough. I thought so, I said. Look, I'm not trying to criticize the plan. I'm trying to make sure it works. If we start this migration on Sunday at 2 a.m. and it's not done by 6 a.m., Northwest Logistics won't be able to process orders. Their entire distribution network stops. We're talking about millions of dollars in losses per hour. Grace had wheeled her chair over. How do you know it takes 7 hours? I ran it. This weekend. I requested access to the full production backup from IT and ran the complete migration on an isolated staging environment I set up. You did what? Neil's voice had gone dangerously quiet. I tested the migration. I thought. You requested access to production data without authorization? Do you have any idea how many security protocols you just violated? I got authorization from Mitchell, I said. He approved my request Friday afternoon. Check the security logs. Neil's face was reddening. Mitchell isn't your manager. I am. You should have come to me first. I tried. You were in meetings all day Friday, and I wanted to run the test over the weekend so we'd have results before the next planning meeting. So you went over my head. I went to the lead systems architect for technical authorization, which is literally his job. The desk pod had gone completely silent. Colin had stopped typing. Even developers at neighboring pods were pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Neil said, standing up now. His voice was rising. You've been here 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And you think you know better than the team that's been building this system for 8 months? You think you can just ignore the chain of command and do whatever you want? I think I found a critical problem with the migration plan that could cost our client millions of dollars, I said, keeping my voice steady even as my heart hammered. And I think that's more important than whose ego gets bruised. Wrong thing to say. I knew it the second the words left my mouth. Ego? Neil's voice was tight. You want to talk about ego? You've been insufferable since day one. Always showing off, always trying to prove you're smarter than everyone else. Always finding critical problems that nobody else seems to see. Maybe the reason you didn't go to a real university is because you couldn't handle people who were actually as smart as you think you are. The room felt like all the air had been sucked out of it. Neil. Grace's voice was sharp. That's completely out of line. Is it? Because I'm tired of walking on eggshells around this guy. We all are. Leonard hired him as some kind of diversity project. Look, we hired someone from a community college, aren't we progressive? But we're the ones who have to deal with the fact that he doesn't understand how professional teams work. My hands were shaking. I put them in my lap so no one would see. The migration timeline is fine, Neil continued. Your test was flawed because you don't understand the system well enough yet. Which is exactly why you should be doing the work I assign you instead of trying to play architect. Now drop this and update the documentation like I asked. He sat back down, dismissing me. I stared at his back for a long moment. Part of me wanted to keep arguing to make him see reason. Part of me wanted to pack up my things and walk out. But another part, the part that had survived 5 years of grease burns and double shifts and professors who thought I didn't belong in their classrooms, That part knew how to endure. I'll update the documentation, I said quietly. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, mechanically updating API docs while my mind churned. Around 3 p.m. my phone buzzed with a Slack message from Mitchell. My office. Now. Great. Here it came. Neil had probably complained about me going over his head. I walked to Mitchell's office, a glass-walled space on the perimeter with a view of the Seattle skyline. He waved me in and closed the door. Sit, he said. I sat. I heard about what happened with Neil this morning, he began. I'm sorry I went to you instead of. He held up a hand. Stop. You did exactly what you should have done. You identified a technical risk, you needed authorization to test it, and you came to me because that's literally my responsibility. Neil's reaction was unprofessional and I'm addressing it separately. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. But that's not why I called you in here, Mitchell continued. He turned his monitor to face me. I reviewed your migration analysis. And then I ran my own test using the same methodology. He pulled up a spreadsheet with test results. 7 hours and 43 minutes, he said. Even longer than your estimate because I included some error handling scenarios you didn't test for. Daniel, if we had run this migration on Sunday, it would have been a catastrophic failure. So what do we do? I asked. We fix the plan. And you're going to help me present the revised strategy to Leonard tomorrow. He paused. How would you solve this? I'd been thinking about it all morning. 3 options. 1. Optimize the migration script, which might get us down to 5 hours but probably not under 4. 2. Do a phased migration over multiple weekends, which reduces risk but extends the timeline. 3. Run the migration in parallel with the old system for a week, validate data consistency, then cut over. Minimal downtime but more complex. Which would you choose? Option 3. The parallel cutover. The complexity is worth it for the risk reduction. Mitchell smiled. That's exactly what I would choose. Put together a detailed proposal tonight. Tomorrow morning we're presenting to Leonard, Vanessa, and the client's CTO. Wait, the client? Northwest Logistics needs to know their migration plan just changed. And they need to hear it from the person who caught the problem. He looked at me seriously. This is your chance, Daniel. Not just to prove Neil wrong, but to prove you belong here. Are you ready? I thought about that morning's confrontation. About Neil's words, some kind of diversity project. About every time someone had looked at my resume and decided I wasn't good enough before even meeting me. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. That night, I stayed at the office until 11 p.m., building the presentation. Not just slides, I created a complete rollback plan, a risk assessment matrix, a resource allocation schedule, even a script for communicating with Northwest Logistics operations team during the cutover. When I finally caught the last bus home, I was exhausted but energized. Tomorrow would either validate everything I'd been working toward, or it would prove Neil right. I knew which outcome I was fighting for. The next morning, I arrived at 7 a.m. to find Mitchell already in the conference room, reviewing my presentation. This is excellent work, he said. Really thorough. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be. At 8:30 they started filing in. Leonard, Vanessa, Neil looking like he'd swallowed something sour. And 3 people I didn't recognize, 2 men in expensive suits and a woman in a blazer with the Northwest Logistics logo on it. Everyone, this is Raymond Foster, CTO of Northwest Logistics and his team, Leonard said. Raymond, this is Mitchell Grant, our lead architect, and Daniel Foster, one of our senior architects. No relation, I assume? He smiled at the shared last name. Not that I know of, I said, shaking Raymond's hand. His grip was firm, his eyes assessing. Mitchell tells me you found a problem with our migration plan, Raymond said. I'm very interested to hear about it. For the next 45 minutes I walked them through everything. The problem, my testing methodology, the results, and the proposed solution. I showed them simulations, data flow diagrams, risk matrices. I answered every question they threw at me. Neil tried to interject twice, but Leonard quietly shut him down both times. When I finished, Raymond leaned back in his chair and looked at Leonard. You told me this migration was bulletproof, he said, and there was an edge in his voice. We thought it was, Leonard said carefully. But Daniel's analysis revealed assumptions we hadn't properly validated. Assumptions that would have cost us a full day of operations, Raymond said. Maybe more if the rollback failed. He turned to me. How confident are you in this parallel cutover approach? Very confident, I said. I've run it in staging 6 times. The risk is significantly lower than the original plan, but more complex to execute. Yes. But I'll be on site for the entire cutover. If anything goes wrong, I can troubleshoot in real time. Neil made a noise. Everyone looked at him. Something to add? Vanessa asked, her tone icy. Just that we have experienced architects who could handle the on-site coordination, Neil said. No offense to Daniel, but this is a critical deployment. Maybe we should have someone with more background leading it. The room went silent. Raymond Foster looked at Neil, then at me, then back at Neil. Let me get this straight. Daniel here caught a critical flaw that your experienced architects missed. He developed a solution that mitigates the risk. And now you're suggesting we shouldn't trust him to implement his own plan because, why exactly? Neil's face went red. I just think. I don't care what you think, Raymond interrupted. I care about results. And the results so far suggest that Daniel is the most careful person on your team. He turned to Leonard. I want him leading this migration. Personally. And I want status updates directly from him, not filtered through your team structure. Leonard nodded. Of course. One more thing, Raymond said, standing up. Daniel, you mentioned you built a custom inventory system for a restaurant chain? Just 2 locations, I said. But yes. I'd like to hear about that. Maybe over lunch? I'm always interested in practical applications of logistics software. We ended up at a steakhouse in downtown Seattle, just Raymond and me. Over expensive steaks that I was pretty sure I shouldn't be eating on my lunch break. I told him about Jimmy's Diner. The problems I'd solved. The constraints I'd worked under. The results I'd achieved. Raymond listened, asking sharp questions that showed he really understood the technical challenges. You know what impresses me most? He said finally. You built that system without resources, without a team, without fancy tools. Just you, a problem, and the determination to solve it. That's rare. Most developers I meet, they're brilliant with unlimited resources. But give them constraints and they fold. He cut into his steak. I started Northwest Logistics 30 years ago with 1 truck and a pager. Built it into a $400 million company. You know what I learned? Pedigree doesn't mean shit. It's just a signal and not even a reliable one. What matters is whether you can solve real problems for real people. Try telling that to some of my coworkers, I said. I'm guessing you're talking about that Neil character. I didn't respond, but my expression must have said enough. Let me tell you something about guys like Neil, Raymond said. They're terrified. Their whole identity is built on being from the right background. The right school, the right internships, the right pedigree. But deep down they know it's all just credential stacking. They know that when it comes to actual problem solving, that Stanford degree doesn't mean much. So when someone like you comes along and proves that, it breaks their whole worldview. He pointed his fork at me. Don't let him make you small. You earned your place in that room today. Not because Leonard felt sorry for you, not because of diversity quotas or whatever bullshit Neil probably tells himself. But because you're good at what you do. When I got back to the office, there was a company-wide email waiting. Subject: Cascade Project, Migration Strategy Update. Team. After a comprehensive risk analysis conducted by Daniel Foster, we're implementing a revised migration strategy for the Northwest Logistics cutover. Daniel will be leading the technical implementation with full support from the architecture team. This change demonstrates the value of rigorous testing and the importance of challenging assumptions, no matter how established. I want to commend Daniel for his thoroughness and professional courage in raising these concerns. Leonard Hartwick, CTO. I read it twice to make sure it was real. Neil's desk was empty. Grace rolled her chair over. He went home sick, she said, making air quotes around sick. Right after the meeting ended. Oh. Don't feel bad, Colin added, joining us. He had this coming. Leonard's been getting complaints about his management style for months. This was just the final straw. What do you mean? Grace exchanged a look with Colin. You're not his first target. Last year there was a developer from a state school, not even community college, just not Ivy League. Neil made his life hell until he quit. HR investigated but couldn't prove anything. It was all just subtle stuff, you know? Death by 1,000 cuts. The difference is you fought back, Colin said. You didn't let him make you small. And you had the goods to back it up. That evening as I packed up to leave, I found Vanessa standing by my desk. Walk with me, she said. We rode the elevator down in silence. She didn't speak until we were outside in the Seattle drizzle. I wanted to apologize, she said. I've been aware of Neil's behavior for a while. I should have addressed it sooner, before it got to you. It's okay, I said. No, it's not. We hired you because you're talented. And then we let someone make you feel like you didn't belong here. She looked at me seriously. You do belong here, Daniel. Not despite where you came from, but because of it. You see problems other people miss because you've had to solve real problems with real constraints. That's valuable. Thank you, I said. The migration cutover is in 2 weeks, she continued. It's a lot of responsibility. Are you sure you're ready for it? I thought about everything I'd been through. The interview where they laughed at me. Neil's constant undermining. The fight to prove myself every single day. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. She smiled. Good. Because after this is done, we need to talk about your role here. I think, senior architect, might be selling you short. The 2 weeks before the migration were the most intense of my professional life. I assembled a team, Grace and Colin, plus 3 developers from other squads who'd heard about the project and volunteered. Neil was conspicuously absent, officially on medical leave. We met every day going through every possible scenario. What if the data validation fails? What if the parallel systems drift out of sync? What if Northwest Logistics needs to roll back mid-cutover? For every question I made sure we had an answer and a plan. Mitchell shadowed me through most of it, not to micromanage but to provide air cover when I needed resources or authorization. He'd become a mentor in a way I hadn't expected. You're a natural at this, he said one evening as we reviewed the run book for the 100th time. Leading teams, I mean. You get people to believe in the mission. I just don't want to screw it up, I admitted. That's what makes you good at it. The people who worry about screwing up are the ones who do the preparation to make sure they don't. The cutover was scheduled for Saturday, December 18th, starting at 6 p.m. Northwest Logistics would continue operating on the old system while we brought up the new one in parallel. For 24 hours, every transaction would be recorded in both systems. We'd validate consistency continuously, and if everything looked good, we'd switch all traffic to the new system Sunday evening. Friday afternoon my phone rang. A known number. Daniel Foster, I answered. Daniel, it's Raymond Foster. From Northwest Logistics. Oh hey. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I just wanted to call personally before tomorrow. I've been following your preparation and I'm impressed. My team tells me you've thought of scenarios they didn't even consider. I'm trying to be thorough. You're succeeding. Listen, I know there's pressure on you for this. It's a big migration, high stakes, and you're relatively new. But I want you to know I have complete confidence in you. You caught the problem, you designed the solution, you've done the work. Tomorrow, just execute what you've planned. Thank you. That means a lot. One more thing. I heard through the grapevine that you had some trouble with a colleague. Someone questioning whether you were qualified for this. I didn't know what to say to that. I've been in business a long time, Raymond continued. Built this company from nothing. And you know what I've learned? The people who question other people's qualifications are usually the ones most insecure about their own. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. You've earned your place at that table. Saturday arrived cold and gray, typical December in Seattle. I got to the office at 4 p.m., 2 hours before kickoff. The Northwest Logistics technical team was already online, their faces appearing on monitors we'd set up in the war room, a large conference space that would be our command center for the next 30 hours. Grace, Colin, and the rest of my team trickled in, setting up laptops and double-checking connections. At 5:30 Leonard and Vanessa stopped by. Everything ready? Leonard asked. As ready as we'll ever be, I said. You've got this, Vanessa said. We'll be on standby if you need us, but this is your show. At exactly 6 p.m. I initiated the sequence. Okay everyone, we're live. Starting parallel data replication now. I hit the command and on the screens around us, logs started scrolling. Data flowing from the old system to the new. Transactions replicating in real time. It was beautiful and terrifying. The first hour went smoothly. Data was syncing properly, validation checks were passing. Both systems were handling the load. I started to relax slightly. Then at 7:23 p.m., alarms started going off. We've got validation failures in the inventory allocation module, Colin called out. The two systems are diverging. My stomach dropped. How bad? About 2% of transactions showing inconsistencies. New system is showing different available quantities than the old system. This was exactly the kind of edge case we'd prepared for. I pulled up the diagnostic dashboard I'd built. It's the race condition I was worried about, I said, seeing the pattern immediately. Two warehouses trying to allocate the same item simultaneously. The old system handles it with locking, but the new system's eventually consistent model is creating conflicts. What do we do? Grace asked. Everyone was looking at me. The Northwest Logistics team was waiting. This was the moment, either I'd prepared enough or I hadn't. We implement the conflict resolution protocol, I said, pulling up a script I'd written for exactly this scenario. I built a reconciliation service that detects these divergences and resolves them using business rules. I was hoping we wouldn't need it, but I'm glad we have it. I deployed the service, my fingers moving across the keyboard with more confidence than I felt. The script spun up, started analyzing the conflicts, applying resolution logic. 5 minutes later, the divergence rate dropped to 0.3%. 10 minutes after that, it was at 0.01%. That's within acceptable tolerance, I said, letting out a breath. We're back on track. Nice save, one of the Northwest Logistics engineers said over the video call. That reconciliation service is slick. How long did it take you to build that? About a week, I said. I built it as a backup plan just in case. Raymond Foster's voice came through the speaker. He'd been listening silently the whole time. See? This is why I wanted Daniel leading this. He doesn't just plan for success. He plans for every way things could go wrong and has solutions ready. The rest of the night was smoother. We hit a few more minor issues, a database connection pool that needed tuning, a caching layer that wasn't invalidating properly, but nothing we couldn't handle. By 3 a.m. my team was running on coffee and adrenaline, but we were smiling. It was working. At 6 a.m. Sunday morning, with the sun starting to rise over Seattle, I ran a comprehensive validation check. After 12 hours of parallel operation, the two systems were 99.97% consistent. The remaining discrepancies were all documented, explainable, and within tolerance. All right, everyone, I said. Get some rest. Be back at 4 p.m. for the final cutover. My team shuffled out, exhausted but energized. I should have gone home too, but I was too wired. Instead, I crashed on the couch in the war room, setting an alarm for 2 p.m. I woke up to my phone ringing. Mitchell. How's it looking? He asked. Good. Really good. Barring any surprises, we're on track for cutover tonight. I knew you could do it. Listen, Leonard wants to be there for the final switch. Is that okay? Of course. At 4 p.m. everyone was back. My team, Mitchell, Leonard, Vanessa, and half a dozen other Apex employees who'd heard about the migration and wanted to witness it. The war room felt like mission control. For the next 3 hours we ran final checks. Every service, every database, every integration point. Everything was green. At 7 p.m. I called Raymond Foster. We're ready, I said. All validations passing. System stable. Ready to flip the switch on your command. There was a pause. The command is yours, Daniel. This is your architecture, your plan, your execution. You make the call. I looked around the room at my team. At Grace and Colin, who trusted me from the start. At Mitchell, who'd given me a chance to prove myself. At Leonard and Vanessa, who'd backed me when it mattered. All right, I said. Beginning traffic cutover to the new system. Phase 1, switching 10% of traffic. I executed the command. On the monitors, we watched as traffic started flowing to the new system. Requests per second climbing. Response times holding steady. Error rates at 0. Phase 1 successful. Switching to 25% traffic. Everything held. 50%. Still stable. 75%. The room was silent except for the hum of computers and the click of keyboards. 100%. All traffic now on the new system. For a moment nothing happened. Then the monitoring dashboards lit up with green checks. Every service healthy. Every database responding. Transaction throughput actually higher than the old system. The war room erupted in cheers. We did it, Grace said, hugging me. Holy shit, we actually did it. Raymond Foster's voice came through the speakers, and I heard cheering in the background from his team too. Daniel, that was flawless. Absolutely flawless. I've been through a dozen system migrations and I've never seen one go that smoothly. Thank you, I said, feeling the tension of the last 2 weeks finally releasing. But it was a team effort. I couldn't have done this without. Don't be modest, Raymond interrupted. You led this. You made the hard calls. You deserve the credit. Leonard walked over and extended his hand. Daniel, that was exceptional work. I mean it. That migration would have been a disaster if you hadn't caught it. Instead, it's going to be a case study in how to do these things right. Over the next hour, as we monitored the system and confirmed everything was stable, people kept stopping by to congratulate me. Developers I barely knew. Managers from other teams. Even the CFO came by. At 9 p.m., Confident the system was solid, I finally let my team go home. I stayed another hour watching the metrics, making sure nothing weird emerged. But it was stable. Rock solid. As I packed up my laptop, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Sure." She sat down across from me. "So, remember when I said we needed to talk about your role after this was done?" "Yeah. How would you feel about a promotion?" "Lead systems architect. Mitchell's position actually. He's moving up to VP of engineering. We're creating a new role for him. Which means we need someone to take over his responsibilities." I stared at her. "Are you serious? I've been here 3 months. And in 3 months you've proven yourself more than most people do in 3 years. You caught a critical flaw others missed. You designed and led a flawless migration. You built a team that trusts you. That's what leadership looks like." "What about Neil?" "Neil is no longer with the company. He resigned last week. Between his behavior toward you and some other complaints that came to light, HR and Leonard agreed it was best for everyone. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. I don't want to succeed because someone else failed," I said. "You're not," Vanessa replied firmly. "You're succeeding because you're good at this. Neil's exit is separate from your promotion. You've earned this on your own merit. Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take a few days." "But Daniel?" She stood up. "Stop waiting for permission to be good at what you do. Stop apologizing for your success. You belong here. The sooner you believe that, the better." I left the office at 10 p.m. and caught a late bus home. As we wound through Seattle streets, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From Jimmy's Diner to this moment. From being laughed at in an interview to leading a critical migration for a Fortune 500 company. My phone buzzed. A text from Jimmy: "Heard about your big project through the grapevine. Raymond Foster's cousin eats at my diner. Small world. Proud of you, kid. Always knew you were going places." I smiled and texted back, "Thanks, boss. Couldn't have done it without learning to fix that ancient POS system. See? Told you that diner experience would come in handy. You never know what skills you'll need. When you coming by? First meal's on me. Tomorrow. I've got a story to tell you." As the bus pulled into my stop in Renton, I saw my reflection in the window. 3 months ago, I'd stood outside Apex Solutions adjusting my tie, terrified I wasn't good enough. Tonight, I was walking away from a successful migration that would be talked about in the company for years. But the person in that reflection wasn't really different from the person who'd walked into that interview. I'd always been capable. I'd always been smart enough, skilled enough, good enough. What had changed wasn't my abilities, it was that I'd finally been in a room where those abilities couldn't be ignored. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Leonard with the subject line, "Thank you, Daniel. I wanted to send a personal note to thank you for your work on the Cascade migration. But more than that, I want to apologize. When you walked into your interview, I almost dismissed you before you even sat down. Your resume didn't fit the pattern I was looking for. And that was my failure, not yours. You've taught this company an important lesson, that talent comes from everywhere, not just the places we traditionally recruit from. That someone's path to this room matters less than what they do once they're here. I'm recommending you for the lead architect position, and I hope you'll accept. But more than that, I'm recommending we revamp our entire recruiting process. We need to find more people like you, people who've solved real problems with real constraints, who've learned to code because they needed to, not just because it was intellectually interesting. Thank you for making us better. Leonard." I read it 3 times. Then I called Vanessa. "I'll take the promotion," I said. "Glad to hear it. When can you start?" "I already have." 3 months later, I stood in front of a group of new hires giving an orientation presentation. Among them were 2 developers from community colleges, one who'd taught herself to code while working at a retail store, and another who'd switched careers at 40 after spending 20 years as a mechanic. They looked nervous, out of place, intimidated by the glass towers and the fancy degrees around them. "I know some of you are wondering if you belong here," I said, meeting their eyes. "I know because I wondered the same thing. Let me tell you what I learned." I pulled up a slide showing the Cascade migration architecture. This is a system I designed and deployed for one of our biggest clients. It handles millions of transactions a day for a $400 million company. And you want to know where I learned the skills that made it possible? I clicked to the next slide, a photo of Jimmy's Diner. I learned them here. Fixing a broken POS system at 2 a.m. because we couldn't afford a real tech. Optimizing inventory with pen and paper before I knew what an algorithm was. Learning to code because I had a real problem to solve and no money to pay someone else to solve it. The room was silent. Some of you have degrees from Stanford or MIT, and that's great. But some of you learned to code while working night shifts or raising kids or serving in the military or fixing cars. And that's great too. Maybe better because you know what it's like to solve real problems with real constraints. That's what we need here. I paused, remembering that interview room, the laughter, the dismissal. So if anyone ever makes you feel like you don't belong in this room, remember something. You're not here because someone felt sorry for you. You're here because you're good at what you do. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Not even yourself. After the presentation, a young woman approached me, one of the community college hires. "Thank you for that," she said quietly. "I've been terrified all week that everyone would figure out I didn't belong here." "You belong here," I said firmly. "Trust me on that. And if you ever doubt it, come find me. I'll remind you." She smiled and walked away. That evening, I met Jimmy at his diner, now 3 locations all running on my software. He slid a burger across the counter to me. "On the house," he said. "For old time's sake." "You don't have to do that. I can afford to pay now." "I know. But some traditions are worth keeping." He leaned on the counter. "I heard you got promoted again. Led something or other?" "Lead systems architect. Basically, I help design the biggest, most complex systems for our biggest clients." "Fancy." He grinned. "Who would have thought? The kid who couldn't figure out why the cash register kept jamming is now some big-shot architect." "Hey, I figured it out eventually." "Yeah, you did. And you know what? That's when I knew you were going to be something special. Most people would have just lived with the broken cash register. Called it a cost of doing business. But you couldn't leave it alone. You had to understand why it was broken and fix it properly." He refilled my coffee. "That's the difference between someone who's smart and someone who's going to change things. Smart people know a lot. Special people can't stand leaving problems unsolved." I thought about that. About the migration I'd caught. About the reconciliation service I'd built just in case. About all the nights I'd stayed late, not because I had to, but because I couldn't rest until I knew the problem was really solved. "Thanks, Jimmy. For everything. For giving me a chance back then, for letting me experiment with your system, for believing I could do more than wash dishes." "Kid, you were never just washing dishes. You were learning. Every minute you were learning." He pointed at me with a spatula. "Don't forget where you came from. Not because you need to be humble or whatever, but because that diner taught you things those fancy schools never could. How to solve problems with no resources. How to work hard when nobody's watching. How to build something that actually matters to real people." "I won't forget," I promised. And I didn't. Years later, when I became CTO of Apex Solutions, the youngest in the company's history, my first initiative was to create a scholarship program for community college students interested in tech. We'd pay for their education, give them internships, and hire them full-time after graduation. We called it the Jimmy Scholarship, and the logo was a diner building with code brackets around it. Because sometimes, the best preparation for solving complex problems isn't an expensive degree. It's grease under your fingernails at 2 a.m., a broken POS system, and the stubborn refusal to accept that something can't be fixed. That's what they laughed at in my interview. That's exactly what made me succeed.